Exercise 2 of Module 3 is all about building printable families. Smaller objects, chairs, tables, desks, can really give a physical model a sense of scale and proportion, so they're important to keep in. The tricky thing is what can we do to work with them to make them printable. So we're going to identify important elements of the design model and modify Revit families to be 3D printed reliably. In exercise 2, we're going to be looking at adding in some details and rather modifying some of the family details to make things printable. And again, rather than hiding some of these elements, what we want to do is keep some things like chairs, furniture, storage, those elements in this initial pass of the base model of the overall enclosure model. That's going to give us a sense of how the space is used. It's going to give us a sense of scale and context, and it's going to do a good job of communicating things to the client and the stakeholders on the project. So if we look at a chair like this, we can determine right away it's not going to print very well in 3D with FDM extrusion printing. For starters, the components of the chair are too small. They're hovering in space. The base of the chair is floating over an edge. So we know we need to create a stand-in for this object. If we look at the display cases, again, we know that we need something like that in place in these different workstations. We need something that's going to help communicate those to the client, but we should be able to make some really simple modifications to those families to get them to print correctly. So as an example, we're just going to look at this default Revit chair, and we'll begin editing it as a family to show you the method that I use in terms of making this a printable model. So we'll start simply by editing the family. And the method that I use in terms of working with a family like this is utilizing the visibility tools. In particular, I know if I'm going to send a model to the printer, I want to be able to export with the coarse setting on my view properties and basically swap out a lower resolution version of the chair for the higher resolution. So I've already taken care of most of this chair other than the chair back, and I'm turning it off in terms of its visibility on the coarse setting. So if we look at the chair base, you can see it's already turned off for coarse. So we just needed to update that with the chair back, and we'll load this back into the project. Overwrite the existing version. And now when I change my visibility settings to coarse, you can see that the chair is completely gone. They're not there, it's invisible. So let's go back and add in something to take the place when we set that to coarse. And basically I'm going to make a simple cube. So I'm going to utilize the existing guides, and I want to make sure that as I'm drawing these lines in, that the edges lock to my guides. So any modifications that I do with the chair, this stand-in box is going to update along with it. And this works great for pretty much any family that you might be working with. Finish by trimming those together. And then I'm moving them off of the guide and back onto the guide. And I'm going to be clicking the lock icon. So again, this stand-in box then is going to move with any parameters that I might change on the chair. So in my 3D view, we'll go ahead and extrude. I'm going to move this up, and we'll lock the top edge to the seat. I'm not going to worry about the chair back. It's pretty small for starters, and just the idea of that base cube is going to get the idea of the chair across. It's only going to be about 3/32 of an inch tall anyway. It's going to be very small in the 16th inch model. Just the idea of how they space out and their approximate size is going to do a really good job of communicating the use in the space. So again, I want this box to not be part of the medium or fine detail. So it's only going to show up in the coarse settings. We'll overwrite the existing version. And now all of the chairs that are in that family, as I change my settings, of course, are swapped out for this very simple little box. I know those are going to print great and in a 16th model look really well also. And I've done the same thing with all of the families in this, simply making these really quick stand-in boxes that aren't going to be great for rendering, but are going to be great for 3D printing. So the next thing in terms of families, there's a few other items to work with, and one of which is the trike and the trike base. And you can see this as an object. This is something I probably don't want to print something that detailed in the overall model. Those are going to be reasonably long prints, maybe a couple of hours, and I don't want something that I'm not 100% sure is going to print perfectly in on those prints. I also have a few details that I've done with the massing tools that aren't showing up right now either, so we need to turn massing on in this view. So I'm going to go to my Visibility Graphics Override, scroll down to Massing, and turn that on. And now you can see the stand-in base that was driving the final base for the trike, and also the cave and geology display. And I'm pretty comfortable with those as elements. I think they'll print directly in place with the entire enclosure model. So the last thing that we're looking at is along the base, there's a few artifacts left that are part of the topography, so we need to hide those. The topography stepping that I have underneath the amphitheater. And finally, the material for the amphitheater steps themselves. Those aren't going to print very well, because they're floating in space, but I know I can flip those and put them on their edge and print them independently later on. So let's just go ahead and hide those as an element as well. And then this should be ready to set up, begin dividing, and sending it to the 3D printer. In exercise 2, we specifically gained an understanding of the elements that may look difficult, but should not be lost in the 3D printing process. We learned how to modify and simplify a Revit family to maintain design integrity and also print reliably.